Welcome to the latest episode of the View from the Bridge podcast, Football.London's Chelsea podcast. And finally, the international break is over. The last of Chelsea players have played their games, with Enzo Fernandez and Moises Caicedo both playing last night in South American World Cup qualifying. Everybody's on the way back to Cobham. We'll be going to see some football soon. I'm Scott Trotter, Chelsea writer for Football.London, and I'm joined today by Bobby Vincent, as always. How are you doing, Bobby? Are you pleased to have football on its way back?
Yeah, it's great. I think the next one's 4 months away or something like that. So, yeah, it's amazing. I'm not a fan of the international break at all. So I'm just glad that it's now finally over. And, we can preview a big game on Saturday.
Yeah, I guess... As always with these international breaks, there are some things to take away. We'll give a shout out to Enzo Fernandez, his Argentina side, and a match that had some controversial scenes in the crowd between Argentina fans and Brazilian police. But nevertheless, Argentina came away as winners against Brazil. Now, that's the first time Brazil have lost at home in World Cup qualifying, which seems mental when you have teams like Argentina playing them every kind of 4 years in that competition. Cole Palmer got his England debut. Incredible scenes to continue his high rise. Axel Disasi got some time playing for France. Armando Broja obviously didn't go away with Albania, but Albania qualified for Euro 2024, so that's a big opportunity for him come the summer. Any standout moments? I'm just pleased to be back on the Chelsea beat properly, Bobby.
It was, it's great to see Cole Palmer, like you said. Even though it was because of Jude Bellingham dropping out, I think he probably should have been included anyway. Two pretty nothing games for England, really, against, I know they drew with North Macedonia, but against sides they should beat. So I thought Cole Palmer should have been included, really, anyway. But yeah, great to see him get some time on the pitch. It thoroughly deserved, because since he signed for Chelsea, we spoke about it a lot, but he's just been excellent. And great for the likes of Axel Disasi as well, of course, a late call up to the France squad. And so good to see some of these players get more minutes.
Yeah, for sure. But I think, as everybody listening at home probably is, very much excited for Premier League football to return. And Chelsea have had a couple of big clashes with that win over Tottenham and the draw against Man City. Exciting clashes, and they face another team who, certainly at the start of the season, probably had Champions League aspirations, are in the Champions League at the moment, in Newcastle United. They sit 7th in the Premier League at the moment, 4 points ahead of Chelsea, who sit 10th. It still feels a bit wild that those last two games for Chelsea have kind of provided this bounce momentum, but they are still 10th.
Exactly that. And I guess that just shows, the sort of terrible little spell they had a couple of months ago where they couldn't buy a goal for love or money, and it looks very different now in terms of their attacking output. Looks a lot better, and they look a lot more dangerous going forward. And I guess that's down to players being in form more than anything else. And I mean, we got the likes of Raheem Sterling, who was excellent against Man City, and it looked like he had a real point to prove. I think he probably had a couple, because obviously against his former club, Man City, against Pep Guardiola, etc., and that whole narrative. And of course, it came, I think, a few days after not being included in the England squad yet again. So, yeah, for him, I mean, he's had 2 weeks of resting, of course, training as well at Cobham, but largely resting and not having to be involved in any competitive action. So that's definitely a plus side for Chelsea. And there are a few other players like that as well. But yeah, I mean, there are, for Chelsea, there's still a long way to go, as we know. But the last two games especially have been, two of the craziest games I can remember Chelsea being involved in recent years, for sort of very different reasons. And we could have yet another one on Saturday. And I mean, it just shows how difficult this fixture run is for Chelsea. They faced Spurs away, obviously did really well there, faced Man City at home, did really well there. And now they're going to Newcastle away, which is one of the toughest places to go to in the Premier League. So yes, dead interesting to see how they cope with a different challenge at St James's Park, one in front of a crowd that is notoriously very loud. So yeah, it's just I'm super interested to see how they go.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, as you noted there, a different challenge against Newcastle. Chelsea have obviously, I guess, found success against better teams this season, but against teams who are quite comfortable in possession, where they've been able to maybe attack against a higher line rather than the lower block. I think maybe Newcastle might bring something a bit more in the middle. Certainly, in Chelsea's outings against them last year, the competitiveness and fight was there against Newcastle, and maybe that's something Chelsea are better prepared for this season than they were last. But I guess what do you make of that kind of stylistic matchup for Chelsea with this regard? Obviously, it's got to be said, Newcastle do have a lot of injuries. A rare team that has a lot more injuries than Chelsea at the moment. So maybe we don't see, the usual Newcastle that we've come to expect over the last 12 months. But yeah, what are your initial kind of thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I've seen Newcastle play probably a handful of times this season, and one that sticks out more than most is I think earlier in the month beating Arsenal, and in that game, I don't think it was in terms of chances and free flowing football. It was definitely probably a worse game than we expected. But in terms of controversy and sort of battles on the pitch, it was really entertaining. Newcastle do have a real grit to their side. I think Bruno Guimaraes in the middle is, especially against Arsenal, he was perhaps lucky not to be sent off. He fouled a lot of times, but he was clearly trying to get into some of the Arsenal players' heads. And I think that shows the sort of steel and grit Newcastle do have, and they might try, to do that against the young Chelsea side as well. And I think for Chelsea, with obviously the Newcastle fans going to join in as well, I think Chelsea are going to have to try and keep their heads. I think we saw against Tottenham when a couple of Spurs players lost their heads. I think it was Levi Colwill just before half time was getting involved in things he didn't need to get involved in, and he was, subsequently brought off like a minutes later at half time. And I think Pochettino will try and guard against that. He obviously wants his side to show that that steel and that grit that I mentioned with Newcastle, but he also wants them to do it in the right ways and not get anyone sent off, not give VAR any decisions to make, etc. But yeah, I think it's really interesting because Newcastle have a lot of injuries at the moment, but they still have, they can still play a pretty strong team on Saturday, and one that perhaps hasn't played together as much over the last 12 months or so, but one that can play different styles on the counter-attack. They're very strong. They can keep the ball well, especially against, so-called lesser teams. And they, like I said, they're really up for a battle. And the Newcastle fans, more than most, are up for the battle as well. And it's very cliche, but they will be like the 12th man. And Chelsea have got to deal with a very hostile atmosphere on Saturday, and it'll be really interesting to see how this young group of players deals with that. And I'm quite confident that they can deal with it. I'm quite confident that they'll be able to get at least a point on Saturday, and hopefully, surprise a lot of people, I guess, by going to St. James's Park.
Yeah, and it would be a big result for Pochettino to continue that momentum after the international break. But I guess to start things off in this, preview element ahead of Newcastle, we'll look at, the injury situation at Chelsea. Of course, they still have a number of long-term issues. Wesley Fofana, Ben Chilwell, Carney Chukwuemeka as well has obviously been out for a little while now after his setback. Trevor Chalobah still out as well. I think he was pictured in the gym this past week, but is still away from team training, and I think there's still a little wait for him. But on the positive side, Levi Colwill obviously pulled out of the England squad, having missed having missed the Manchester City match with a shoulder injury. He's been pictured involved in training. And Malo Gusto, I know he went to France under 21s, and I think he got a scan, and there was a knee problem there, but he has also been involved in training. So I guess lots of defenders for Pochettino to work with early in the week, and I guess that's a bonus. Maybe a boost for Benoit Badiashile. I think we said on the last episode he can get a bit more playing time in before Disasi's return, and it'll be interesting to see how that impacts Pochettino's decision. I I guess Colwell will be maybe the interesting one. Should he prove his fitness? Does he come into the side over Mark Cucurella maybe, or do you think we see the same back line as last time out, Bobby?
I think, yeah, like you said, if Colwell can prove his fitness, I think he probably does come into the side over Cucurella. I think he offers more defensively than Cucurella, more steel, as well as Cucurella has done recently. He has been very good, and look, he's improved massively from what we saw last season. So that's good, and it's good that he's even up for contention with Colwell, who's one of Chelsea's most promising young players. I think as well as that, Reece James did an interview at the weekend and said he's feeling as good as he has done for a while, and that's obviously great news for Chelsea. He pointed out that he's not been able to do 90 minutes yet, but he's hoping, in the next few weeks he'll be able to, and I'm not sure that'll be on Saturday or not, but I think it's definitely a boost and positive for Chelsea that he made in my opinion, smart decision, the wise decision to sort of withdraw himself from the England squad. England are very blessed in that category at right back in that position, so it's not like they'll miss James that much for, like I said, 2 sort of games with not much riding on it as well. I think that was a wise decision from James, and just to get his fitness up, because we haven't seen, I don't think we've seen a peak condition Reece James in God knows how long now. So if we can get that without, touch wood, him getting injured again, then that'll be great. So it was great to hear that he's doing so well. And I think the fact that Gusto and Colwell have been training is obviously a positive. We saw Colwell's injury wasn't too bad, but we weren't quite sure with Gusto. Obviously, when it happens, when they're on international duty, it's harder to find out. But obviously it was a knee injury as well, so we all know how serious they can be. So it's obviously not as bad as first thought, because first feared even, because he's been out training on the grass with Chelsea. So it's all starting to come together now, I think, in terms of injuries. Over the next few weeks, hopefully we'll see Christopher Nkunku and Romeo Lavia, who we've been waiting on for ages, and then I think Wesley Fofana posted quite a positive update on Instagram as well. I think you wrote a piece on it earlier in the week, where he sort of pointed out that he'd been out running again. And that's obviously great news, but we're still expecting him to be out for a while yet. But it seems, touch wood again, that he's ahead of schedule. So that's great as well. And just keep getting these players back and hopefully not get anyone else injured.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess just touching on Nkunku and Lavia, certainly with Nkunku, there's been, I guess, a lot made around his possibility of return. Pochettino kind of dropped it into a press conference a few weeks ago that he could be available after the international break, which I think maybe surprised a few people at the time. And since that point, he's kind of got out and been on the grass, if not with the team. And then ahead of Man City, Pochettino did say that Nkunku's ambition had been Newcastle. Maybe he wasn't quite as convinced of that as what he had been once upon a time, but that was certainly the ambition. And both he and Lavia would be kind of hopefully joining the team and kind of assess day by day to see where they fit. In all the kind of releases we've had from the club so far, it still seems that maybe Nkunku and Lavia are slightly separate, though they are training at Cobham, and I think there's been pictures of some ball work and stuff as well. So I guess, if you had to theorize, Newcastle probably comes a little bit too soon for them at the very most. And I think this is probably be the case whenever these guys come back, because Chelsea have shown a real commitment to patience when players have returned from injury. We've seen it with Reece James in particular this season. They've been keen not to overplay him, but Nkunku is probably going to come back on the bench first. I guess maybe there's an argument that Newcastle, with them being shorter players, maybe he can build fitness late on against them as they tire. But, Chelsea aren't going to be taking any risks with Nkunku, are they?
I think, and also I think what's so good as well is Nkunku and Lavia, they're both in positions where Chelsea are doing really well at the moment. Nkunku, if you said this a month ago or however long ago, when Chelsea weren't scoring that many goals, then Chelsea fans wouldn't have been able to wait for Nkunku to come back. But now now it's a it's an area where there are a few informed players, like I said earlier, Cole Palmer, Raheem Sterling, Nicholas Jackson. And then you've got obviously Mudryk, who's shown glimpses, and I mean, he's been a bit unfortunate because he's picked up a few niggles. But if he had stayed fully fit this whole time since the Fulham game, for example, then we might be looking at a completely different player right now. So yeah, I mean, there's no immediate rush for Nkunku's comeback in that regard. Of course, he offers Chelsea a lot more, and I think he offers Chelsea something they don't have, which is a direct goal threat at sort of all the time. But there's no immediate rush with him. And for Lavia, I mean, we don't know what his role in the team's going to be, to be honest, because, I mean, with Nkunku, we saw him in pre-season at least, but with Lavia, we haven't seen him at all yet for Chelsea. So, and the midfield three as well. We got two over £100 million players, and we got Conor Gallagher, who's, I said on the last pod, he's probably playing better than both of them right now. So I don't know who you drop out of those three if you were to get Lavia in. I think it's very much a case, especially with Lavia, where he will be eased in very slowly. Maybe the old cup game, or we got the FA Cup third round coming up in just over a month. Got the Carabao Cup quarter final next month, and I think that they could be sort of games for Lavia and the odd, last 20 minutes of a game or so. But I don't think he will be rushed into the side at all. He's still very young as well, of course. And like I said, we don't know his role yet. But what I will say on him is he's obviously he's a number 6, a ball-winning number 6, a proper defensive midfielder, something Chelsea don't really have. So they both offer Chelsea something quite unique, but I just, I don't think they will be rushed back at all because they're both coming off the back of long-term injuries. And I think sort of joining their teammates, almost halfway through the season is going to be difficult for them to get up to the fitness levels of their teammates. And I think Pochettino's in. Obviously, it could all change after Saturday, and that things could look worse potentially, or even better. But I think Pochettino's in quite a good position at the moment in terms of not having to rush both of them back.
Yeah, and I think he'll certainly feel it in comparison to Eddie Howe. Newcastle have a bit of an injury crisis on their hands. They did going into that game against Bournemouth that they lost before the international break. I think they had a number of teenagers on the bench, but I'll take a deep breath and we'll just go through their list of players who might not make the cut this coming weekend. So Sandro Tonali, we know, is suspended, I think, until August because of that kind of the betting rules he broke while playing in Italy. Jacob Murphy is out until 2024. Dan Burn is out until 2024. Callum Wilson's not expected to be back until the middle of December. Late December, so he might even miss the next game against Chelsea. Elliot Anderson, very similar. Sven Botman's out. He's obviously a crucial cog in the centre of defence for Newcastle. I think Jamal Lascelles has been playing there for a number of weeks now. Harvey Barnes is out until December. Miguel Almiron, he may be in contention, but I think he's had a bit of an issue recently. Same with Fabian Schär, I think is in contention. Isak in contention, but obviously come back from injury is never easy to do, especially if there's a big burden on you. Javier Manquillo is also out. Matt Target also out. And then, of course, there is a certain Lewis Hall who is ineligible to play for Newcastle because he is still on loan from Chelsea, despite that obligation to buy come the summer, should certain criteria be met. Perhaps I think Chelsea will receive maybe 35 million pounds for him. I think just touching on that deal before looking at the injuries, maybe, I think many probably criticise Chelsea's willingness to do the deal in that manner, maybe helping Newcastle a little bit with the FFP and stuff. But I guess in some regards, it's helped them a little bit now, kind of leaving Newcastle with another man down. That just bring to mind, maybe Chelsea will see former player in the form of Tino Livramento play against them as well. Hopefully that won't come back to bite them on the afternoon. But I guess just how difficult is it going to be for this Newcastle team when they are hit by such injuries? I guess they still are going to have some good players. Obviously, you mentioned Bruno Guimaraes. He did obviously lose to Enzo Fernandez in that Brazil match. I think Joe Linton even got sent off in that match. They're the kind of players that they've still got. They are lacking a forward, and that's been a real strength for them this season. I think they've been really clinical, particularly through Wilson. So whether Isak's back will be big for them. I think Anthony Gordon has been playing up front as well. But is there an area where you think maybe Chelsea can get at? Is it maybe that defensive partnership if Shah still isn't quite up to fitness and Botman remains out?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, speaking as someone who hasn't watched much of Jamal Lascelles in recent years, but I can't imagine, having not played that much football recently because of Shah and Botman, he's in his best condition. I think he's in his 30s now, and I guess that is an area Chelsea will look to get at. I'm looking at their squad right now. They've got Paul Dummett as well, who I guess would play centre back with him if Shah and Botman are both out. I mean, for Chelsea, it's good that Lewis Hall can't play. Obviously, I was definitely one of those people at the time who was quite disappointed with not the fact that Chelsea were helping Newcastle with FFP or anything like that, but just to see a player like Lewis Hall leave Chelsea. I thought, there were at times last season. I mean, the game at Newcastle last season, which we'll get on to later, I think, but he was excellent in that game. And there were so many games last season where he was a shining light for Chelsea. And I think he was 18 at the time. He's 19 now. So for Chelsea to sell him, I thought was a bit of a poor decision. But, it's still a good fee for someone who had barely proven himself at the top level. So I guess that's what the owners wanted. And like you said about Livramento, I watched Newcastle play at Man United in the Carabao Cup. Seems like a month ago now or something, and they were, both sides of defence. And I guess as a Chelsea fan watching that, you'd be quite upset because they were both outstanding that day. I think Livramento got an unbelievable assist for Almiron, I think it was, to open the scoring. And I think that both players have bags of potential. I mean, Livramento is a bit further on with his progression, albeit it was halted by that horrific injury. But I think they're both fabulous players, and Newcastle have got, they've so obviously got Trippier and Manquillo and Damba and Matt Targett as fullbacks as well, but they're set for fullback for years to come with them too, if they can, keep them at the club. But I guess like their attack isn't as potent as it would usually be. I think if Isak comes back for them, that'll be big. But Eddie Howe's probably not the sort of manager who'd rush his players back and potentially risk aggravating an injury. But Isak is a very influential player. So if he's out, then that's obviously a big boost for Chelsea. And then, they're quite short of attacking options. Anthony Gordon's a good player with good potential. I think we saw him score at Stamford Bridge in the last game of last season, and he's been in decent form recently, so he's definitely one to keep an eye out for. But I think with all the injuries, I do think Chelsea have a really good chance against Newcastle, particularly how strong Chelsea have been in these games against, sides in the top half, especially sides where they're perhaps not expected to win against. But I do think Chelsea can really match Newcastle on Saturday. But like I said at the top of the show, I think the atmosphere will make a big difference, and it's sink or swim time for a group of young Chelsea players, and I can't wait to see what happens.
Yeah, it's I think kind of obviously there's a few guys who are on the borderline of maybe whether they come back, and it'll just be interesting to see how does manage that, because Newcastle do have Champions League football in the midweek as well, so maybe that plays into the mind of how much time maybe somebody like Shah or Isak does get on the pitch. That's going to be one to watch come Saturday at 2 p.m. as well. Also, absolutely bewildered that this game isn't a television broadcast game in the UK. It doesn't feel like it makes sense.
Yeah, no, I was confused. I think I looked at the kickoff time last week, just assuming it would be 5:30 or 12:30, and then I saw it was 3 o'clock. I was like, okay, yeah, that is crazy.
Yeah. But we'll just take a quick step back in the past. And you can probably do this for, maybe 90% of Chelsea games last season, given the turnover in the summer transfer window and how new a lot of these players are. But you sent me a message with this just before we came online, and it is pretty crazy to look at. So Chelsea starting 11, last time they visited St James's Park. Last November, I think, just before the World Cup, they did fall to defeat, I think, through a Joe Willock goal. But we'll go through the starting 11, and we've got Eduard Mendy, not at the club. Cesar Spilicueta, not at the club. Trevor Chalobah, still here, but not going to be playing this weekend. Kalidou Koulibaly, not at the club. Ruben Loftus-Cheek, not at the club. Jorginho, not at the club. Kovacic, not at the club. Lewis Hall, at the other club. Conor Gallagher, he could play this weekend. Hopefully, he doesn't suffer any ill effects from the ankle injury that he was carrying. Hopefully, he can play. Mason Mount, not at the club. And Armando Broja, at the club, just coming back from injury. Maybe could play. That's mad, isn't it?
Yeah, I think the 3 players still at the club all come from the academy. Yeah, all come from the academy. And I mean, with Chalobah as well, it's looking quite likely he'll probably leave in January, if not the summer. And then you got Breuer as well, who, I mean, there's no immediate risk of him leaving, but I think probably the next, between now and the end of the season, will be quite big for him in terms of what Chelsea do in the market as well, in terms of a striker. Gallagher now, because he's playing so well, I think, looks like he could stay at Chelsea. Hopefully he does stay at Chelsea and signs a new contract. But yeah, I mean, the rest is just mental, isn't it? And it seems ages ago since we saw a team like that, but in reality it wasn't. Graham Potter would have been in charge then, and it was like I think a 3 at the back formation. Loftus-Cheek was playing at wing back.
Yeah, Conor Gallagher even played at right wing back in the second half too. It was an interesting afternoon.
Yeah, and I guess I think you were at the game. I wasn't at the game. But how did Chelsea play on the day? Was it like, if you've seen that sort of performance now, like, is it anything similar to what we see like nowadays? I know obviously the last couple of games have been mad in terms of goals, but what was the game like, if you can remember?
Yeah, I think it was one of those bizarre ones. Like you say, you kind of see Loftus-Cheek, I think, went down injured pretty early. And, maybe Newcastle didn't play... Chelsea didn't play like as badly as they did come to a lot of the time that season. But I think in comparison to Newcastle just had that bite and tenacity about the player. And I think that's what really stood out about Chelsea this season, is that they have a motor. Maybe it's because Conor Gallagher is playing so well, and he's really driving that kind of relentless press and tenacity in the tackles, obviously with Caicedo and Fernandes in amongst it as well. And I think last year, obviously, the result wasn't what anybody wanted. I think, maybe if I remember correctly, Jorginho might have had a poor game, and a couple of the other guys as well. But what always struck me about Chelsea last season, and maybe it happened a little bit at the start of this season as well, they were always just very average. And there's only so many players that can have average performances, and you do well. You need a couple of guys to, step up and make themselves counted. And that didn't really happen last year much at all. And I think you maybe highlighted it with Raheem Sterling. Cole Palmer's certainly done it this season. They have a couple of players who can, get them out of those difficult matches, difficult moments. And hopefully that can continue with Chelsea. That is probably what they're going to need at the weekend. Hopefully they can, stay in the game early. And I think that we mentioned it last week, but the thing that's standing out with Chelsea, they can come back now as well. They obviously went a goal behind against Tottenham. They went behind 3 times against Man City. That is big. And especially if you're going to be in an atmosphere that they are probably going to be like on Saturday. I'm just looking there as well, noticing the substitutes. It doesn't make for much better reading, really. Marcus Bettinelli still at the club, but hasn't played this season due to injury. Thiago Silva, obviously a mainstay. Marc Cucurella in a wildly different position to what he was this time last year. I think he started behind Lewis Hall that day. I think Lewis Hall did play quite well against Newcastle last season. I remember him being on a lot of set pieces anyway.
Yeah.
Amari Hutchinson, obviously on loan, which is probably where he should have been last season, but enjoying quite a good loan at Ipswich this year. Dennis Zakaria gone, Kai Havertz gone, Christian Pulisic gone, Ziyech on loan, but I guess we presume will be pretty much gone, and Aubameyang gone. Interesting, I guess. That's maybe not a bench like a lot of those guys would have started games for Chelsea that season, but we I guess briefly talked about earlier the difference in Chelsea's team this year. Are they better or worse off the bench? Do they have more depth at the moment? Or obviously the injuries have played a big part where Chelsea have lacked depth and put a lot of goalkeepers on the bench. But maybe coming into this fixture, do you feel more confident in Chelsea? I guess they have a Mudryk to come off the bench, a Madueke to come off the bench now. Is that better than what they had last year?
I think there's a lot more youth this year than there was last year off the bench. I think the names you listed there wasn't too many young players bar Amari Hutchinson that came to mind. Obviously this year we've seen like David Washington on the bench a lot, and I think he's only got on once, but it's good to see him on the bench. But yeah, Madueke and Mudryk are always good options, and but I guess there is a lot more youth at Chelsea this year, and I guess that was always going to happen because of the amount of players Chelsea sold in the summer. They still signed, don't get me wrong, they still signed a fair few, but they would have had to, match the amount they sold to get the same sort of depth, obviously. And, that wasn't possible. So I think depth is probably something that, like great depth as well. You got to remember the injuries they have. I think with the players we listed earlier, if they're fit and available, then the bench looks a whole lot different. But I do think that that will be addressed probably in the next few windows in terms of getting those sort of players, having 2 really solid players per position, maybe 3 in some cases. But yeah, I mean, last year there was definitely more experience on the bench, and some of them had decent Chelsea careers, don't get me wrong, the players you read from the bench. But looking, just, casting your mind back to last season and looking at our bench, there's no one on there who you would have thought could come on and change a game. I think, like I said, I think Kai Havertz overall had an on and off Chelsea career. He's obviously remembered some brilliant moments, but last season I thought he was poor for most of it. So I don't think, he was an option really off the bench. Christian Pulisic the same. Hakim Ziyech sort of seemed to switch off. Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang was just a transfer that never worked. So I think now as well, you've got players who have better mindsets and the sort of mindsets that Pochettino wants, rather than a few players last season where, there were question marks raised over, their psychological situation more than anything else. But yeah, I do think Chelsea are probably better off now, even if, there's not as many experienced players.
Yeah, and I guess that kind of brings me to the next question. Chelsea have shown the ability to improve against the top sides so far this season. I think they've already picked up more points against Man City than they did in the whole of last season, and the same is true of Tottenham. Maybe Arsenal. I can't remember how they got in their first game against
Arsenal. They lost twice to Arsenal last season. So yeah.
So obviously last year at St James's Park, Chelsea lost, and then at Stamford Bridge they came away with a draw on the final day of the season, I believe. And then can Chelsea come away with 3 points this weekend? And I guess, what's your prediction?
I think now is the chance for Chelsea at St James's Park. Like, we spoke a lot about the injuries, and I mean, Newcastle are coming into this game off the back of 2 defeats, albeit they were away from home. But so I know St James's Park is a different kettle of fish, and like I said, only Liverpool have got points from there this season in the Premier League. But I do think Chelsea could potentially get a draw or even a win. I do quite fancy them here. I think what they've shown against the big sides in the league, I've been really impressed with, and I think they've come up against better teams than Newcastle and have done really well, especially a Newcastle side so depleted by injuries at the moment. But yeah, look, I'm not going to sit here and write Newcastle off, because I know what St James's Park can do to players, and I think they still can play a fantastic team, and I think Eddie Howe's a brilliant manager who can adapt to different situations. But I do think it's kind of like now or never for Chelsea to get something at St James's Park because of the situation Newcastle are in. But yeah, so if I was to predict, I probably would go for a Chelsea win, and it's not often on this podcast I'm sat here and predicting a Chelsea win. So yeah, I think maybe 2-1. 3-2, something like that. I think again we're probably in for a few goals. I don't think Chelsea at the moment are in a position where they can go to Newcastle and keep a clean sheet. Even against the, like I said, a depleted side. But yeah, I'm fancying Chelsea.
Yeah, it's just interesting how the last couple of games gives you a whole different kind of view and momentum of Chelsea, because I feel like it wasn't that long ago it was hard to predict Chelsea scoring a goal. And
well, the thing is, right, if this was Sheffield United at home, I wouldn't be confident, but that's a conversation for a different day, and we spoke about it. But like, because Newcastle are going to come out and attack Chelsea, I do fancy them.
Yeah. It'll certainly be interesting to see how Newcastle do approach the game. Obviously, being at home makes a big difference as well. So I think, like you, maybe I do fancy Chelsea for the win this weekend. It's a rare opportunity, and there's just things trending nicely for Chelsea, and they still have some big teams to play, and hopefully they can take advantage of that. And I think last time Reece James was at St James's Park, he scored a brace as well. So if he can attack and do that, albeit that was against I think a very different pre-Eddie Howe Newcastle United, maybe Chelsea fans can enjoy the train ride home or a night out on the big market come Saturday night. I guess before we finish, we'll once again touch on a few transfer snippets with January quickly approaching. We talked briefly about Ivan Toney last week and maybe Victor Osimhen. There's been a little bit of an update in terms of that, Bobby. Do you just want to, I guess, give us your thoughts on that and let us know what you found out so far?
Yeah, I was just told on Monday, I think it was. Yeah, I think it was Sunday evening, but I wanted to, anyway. So I put out on Monday that Chelsea are considering a bid for Ivan Toney in January. I think maybe last week on the pod, it was my opinion, but I said that perhaps Chelsea would wait until the summer to sign a striker, and I'm again not ruling that out. I'm not saying it's definitely going to be in January, but I was just told that Chelsea are considering a bid for Ivan Toney. And we've known for a while now that Toney is keen to leave Brentford, and he's changed agencies and everything like that. He's changed to, I can't remember his name right now, but someone who is very, experienced, if that's the right word, in getting big moves for players. So that I think tells you everything in terms of where his head's at. He obviously wants to play football again, and he's due back in mid-January. And Chelsea, they can either wait it out to the summer and potentially be against other clubs for him. I mean, we know Arsenal are interested, but Arsenal's situation is a bit different to Chelsea's, where they need to sell to buy. Not to do with FFP, just apparently they haven't, got the transfer funds. So that's a bit different. And Chelsea and Arsenal are sort of the two big clubs being mentioned right now. So, but there is a bit of consideration to be done, obviously, because they very highly rate Nicholas Jackson, but I think they feel like there's almost been an over-reliance on him, and that obviously can affect your performance, especially at such a young age, where he's still very raw and developing. They've obviously got Christopher Nkunku to come back, but we don't know what role he's going to be in, and we obviously don't know how long it's going to take him to have the impact that he will eventually have, for sure. But there's, even we spoke about earlier that there are players playing well there right now. But with Chelsea, when you come back, you're going to have pressure on you, particularly in attacking positions. It's just a way of how football works. But yeah, I mean, by signing someone like Ivan Toney, then that could potentially, lift the weight off of Jackson's shoulders. And while people think it might halt his development in terms of playing time, and I'm sure it would, in terms of him not being on the pitch as much, it could also benefit him because he wouldn't have this sort of endless pressure on him to produce when Chelsea aren't doing particularly well. And having someone like Tony to learn off as well. I think I was quite surprised when I saw Tony's age. He's 27 now, so he's not as young as I perhaps first thought. So he's a very experienced striker, but having someone like him to, learn off as well for Jackson could be really beneficial, because he's what we call a traditional number 9, Ivan Toney. And yeah, of course, former Newcastle as well, going into the weekend, so all very relevant. But yeah, and obviously there's been a lot of talk about Victor Osimhen. We haven't heard too much on him, but definitely someone who's been mentioned to me in the past in terms of being on Chelsea's radar. But yeah, Ivan Toney, very exciting. Definitely one to keep an eye on in January.
Yeah, and I guess the other guy that there's been a bit of chatter about today, I think a certain Fabrizio Romano has been asked about him, is Trevor Chalobah. Obviously, maybe quite an expectation for him to leave in the summer, but there's certainly a lot of talk over his possible departure. I think both player and club were probably open to a move in some form, but it didn't end up happening. He's obviously been injured since the summer, not played again this year, and I guess isn't in sort of sight of coming back too soon. He's not training with the team or anything like that, for example. But still, the prospect of a January move for Trevor Chalobah, are you kind of hearing anything on that yet, Bobby? And I guess, is it something that still makes sense? I guess Chalobah's perhaps thinking about a last chance to maybe get in that Euros squad if he can prove his fitness. And obviously, Chelsea have shown a willingness to sell academy products because of, FFP and trying to, realize some profit in financial terms.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't heard anything in a while on Chalobah, but by all means, not long after the transfer window closed in the summer, we were hearing that Chelsea would still be really open to selling him, and players sort of feels the same. And I can't imagine that's changed too much, as of course he's injured at the moment. But the club brought Axel Disasi in over the summer, which I think was quite big. In terms of, I don't think he was injured at the time. In terms of replacing Wesley Fofana, and I guess it almost showed a lack of faith in Chalobah, and that's obviously going to have an influence on the player and relationship with the club, etc. And like you said, the fact that Chelsea can sell him for pure profit because of FFP and him being a product of the academy, I guess it's in their best interest to do so if they don't believe he's the man. They want to see playing for Chelsea at the back, and that Chalobah really wanted to go in the summer. That was quite obvious, and he was wanting that move to Bayern Munich, but unfortunately it didn't happen for him. So yeah, I do fully expect this to happen either in January or the summer, because we know sometimes deals can be really hard to strike in January because of really many different circumstances, but definitely one to happen, I think, in the next 7-8 months, that sort of time frame.
Cool. And yeah, I guess the thing to remember with Chalobah is, for all Chelsea might be willing to sell him, and maybe even more than that, maybe do want to sell him, they are in, I guess, a strong position to negotiate because he's on a super long contract. Yeah. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how all these things play out. Obviously, in the summer, we saw plenty of interest in Conor Gallagher, and they said no to, I think, a bid of around £40 million. That looks like a brilliant decision at the moment. So just, they are willing to wait for the right price. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that one pans out. And I guess now, as we kind of lie in wait of that Newcastle game on Saturday, we'll end things there. Thank you once again for joining me, Bobby. Thank you all very much for listening. And hopefully next week, if we're back again, we have a win to talk about against Newcastle. So yeah, thank you very much for joining us, and see you again next time.